"May I have leftovers, sir?" the dragon asked when the mechanic met his eyes. A miracle occurred. The space station called Nexus 7 floated in the cold darkness near a dying red star. And it was not a kind place for those without power or credits to their name. Park Jinho had lived on this station for 7 years now, running a small ship repair bay in the lower decks where the lights flickered and the air recyclers hummed with age. And he preferred it that way because the upper levels were too bright and too loud and filled with species who looked down on humans as primitive newcomers. To the galactic stage, he was 42 years old, with gray starting to show in his black hair, and his hands were rough from years of honest work on engines and hull plating and navigation systems that other mechanics refused to touch. The lower decks of Nexus 7 were home to the forgotten ones, the laborers and servants and scavengers who kept the station running while the wealthy species above never thought about where their clean water came from or who scrubbed it. The waste processors each night among these forgotten ones were the Drucker, and Jinho had seen them since his first day on the station, and he still remembered how his heart had stopped at the sight of them. Creatures that looked like the dragons from old Korean legends, with scaled skin in colors of deep blue and emerald green and burnt orange, with long necks and tails and wings that had been clipped short to prevent flight. They walked hunched over as if apologizing for their own existence, and they never met anyone's eyes. And they spoke only when spoken to in voices barely above a whisper. The Galactic Compact classified them as non-sentient labor resources, which was a fancy way of saying they were property, and the species that had conquered them 300 years ago. The hegemony of scales had spread lies throughout the galaxy that the Dracarin were nothing more than clever animals who could mimic speech but had no true thoughts or feelings of their own. Jinho did not believe this for a single moment. He saw how they moved when they thought no one was watching, how they helped each other carry heavy loads, how the older ones would sometimes touch the younger ones gently on the shoulder in what could only be comfort. But he kept his thoughts to himself because he was just one human mechanic in a station of 50,000 souls. And what could he possibly do against 3 centuries of injustice? His shop was small but clean, tucked between a water recycling plant and a storage facility for emergency rations. And behind the shop was an alley where the garbage disposal units hummed day and night. It was there that he first noticed her. She was small for a Dracarin, with scales the color of pale gold that had lost their shine from malnutrition, and her eyes were large and round and the same golden color as her scales. And she moved with the careful silence of someone who had learned that being noticed meant being hurt. For 3 weeks, Jinho pretended not to see her digging through the garbage for scraps of food, because he told himself it was not his business and getting involved would only bring trouble. But each night he found himself unable to eat his dinner without thinking of those hollow golden eyes. His wife's son, he would have known what to do. She had always been the brave one, the one who spoke up against unfairness, the one who had taught their daughter Minji that kindness was not weakness but the greatest strength a person could have. But Sunhee and Minji were gone now, killed 5 years ago when a transport ship's engine failed and sent 200 passengers into the cold void of space. And Jinho had buried his heart with them and told himself that caring about others only led to pain. Yet here he was on this 22nd night, standing at the back door of his shop with a bowl of rice and vegetables in his hands. And he could not explain even to himself why he had cooked extra food. The young Dracarin was crouched behind the garbage unit, and she froze when she saw him, her whole body going tense with fear, as if preparing to run. Jinho did not move toward her because he understood that trust could not be forced. So he simply set the bowl down on the ground and stepped back inside his shop. When he looked out the window a few minutes later, the bowl was empty and the young dragon was gone. This became their ritual every night. Jinho would cook extra food, nothing fancy. Just rice with whatever protein and vegetables he could afford. And every night he would set the bowl outside and step away. And every night she would come and eat and disappear. He never spoke to her, and she never spoke to him. But something shifted between them anyway. Some unspoken understanding that existed in the silence. Then came the night when everything changed. Jinho was eating his dinner inside the shop, sitting on an old crate near the window where he could watch the stars through a gap in the station's hull plating. And he had not yet set out the bowl because he was tired and his bones ached, and sometimes a man just needed a moment to himself. He heard a sound behind him, the softest scrape of claws on metal flooring, and he turned to find the young dragon. Standing in the doorway of his shop, she was shaking, and her golden eyes were fixed on the bowl of food in his hands. And she looked like she was gathering every ounce of courage she had ever possessed. And then she spoke in a voice that trembled but did not break. "May I have leftovers, sir?" Jinho looked at her, really looked at her, and he saw not an animal but a child. A hungry, frightened child who had probably never asked anyone for anything in her entire life, because asking meant hoping, and hoping meant being crushed. He saw his daughter Minji in those golden eyes. He saw himself. "You can have more than leftovers," Jinho said. And his voice came out rough, because something in his chest was cracking open after 5 years of being frozen solid. "Come inside and sit down. I will make you a proper meal." The young dragon stared at him as if he had just offered her the entire galaxy, and tears began to fall from her golden eyes. And Jinho realized that no one had ever shown her kindness without wanting something in return. This was the moment when a mechanic with a broken heart met a dragon with a stolen future. And neither of them knew it yet, but the galaxy would never be the same. Her name was impossible for human tongues to pronounce, as a series of clicks and low growls that her people had spoken for thousands of years before the hegemony came and silenced them. So Jinho asked if he could call her Kira, and she had nodded with wonder in her eyes, as if the simple act of being given a name was a gift. Beyond measure, she was 12 years old in human terms, and she had been alone for 2 years since her parents were decommissioned. That was the word the station authorities used when Dracarin became too old or sick to work. And Jinho did not ask what happened to those who were decommissioned, because he already knew the answer, and it made his hands shake with anger. Kira ate like someone who had never been sure where her next meal would come from, quickly and desperately. And Jinho had to tell her 3 times to slow down before she understood that the food would not be taken away. "More?" she asked when the bowl was empty, and there was fear in her voice, as if she expected to be punished for wanting. "Always more," Jinho said. And he filled her bowl again and watched her eat. And something that had been dead inside him for 5 years began to breathe again the next night she came back, and the night after that. And soon it became their routine. Kira would appear at the shop door, just as the station's artificial lights dimmed to simulate evening. And Jinho would have 2 bowls ready instead of 1, and they would eat together in comfortable silence. Other humans on the station noticed. "You are making a mistake," said Chun Wei, who ran a parts supply shop 2 levels up. "The Dracarin property helping them brings attention from the wrong people. And trust me when I tell you that you do not want Administrator Vex Thel asking questions about your business." "She is just a child," Jinho replied. "She is not a child," Chen Wei said with something like pity in his eyes. "Under Galactic Compact law, she is equipment like a cleaning drone or a cargo loader, and you cannot adopt equipment, my friend." But Jinho stopped listening because he had spent his whole life being told what was possible and what was not. And his wife Sunhee had taught him that the only limits that truly mattered were the ones you placed on yourself. Kira began helping around the shop. It started small. She would fetch tools when Jinho's hands were busy, or sweep the floor while he worked on an engine, or organize the spare parts that had been sitting in chaotic piles for years. But soon Jinho realized that she was not just helping. She was learning. He would explain what he was doing as he worked, not because he expected her to understand, but because talking helped him think. And one day, he turned around to find that Kira had already diagnosed a problem with a fuel injection system that had taken him 2 hours to identify. "How did you know?" he asked with surprise. "I watched you fix one like it last week," Kira said quietly, as if admitting intelligence was dangerous. "I remember things. Is that wrong?" "No," Jinho said, and his voice was fierce. "That is never wrong. You are smart, Kira. Smarter than half the mechanics on this station. And do not let anyone tell you otherwise." She smiled for the first time then, a small hesitant thing that transformed her whole face. And Jinho felt his heart crack open a little. More weeks passed, and Kira grew stronger, her scales regaining their golden shine, her movements becoming less fearful, her voice finding strength, and Jinho found himself looking forward to each day in a way he had not done since Sunhee and Minji were alive. He taught her to read star charts and calculate fuel consumption and identify the sound a healthy engine made versus a sick one. And she absorbed knowledge like dry ground absorbing rain after a long drought. One evening, she showed him something she had never shown anyone. They were alone in the shop after a long day, and Kira was staring at a piece of scrap metal with an intensity that made Jinho pause. "I want to show you," she said in a whisper. "But you have to promise not to be scared." "I promise," Jinho said. Though he had no idea what she meant, Kira opened her mouth, and fire came out. It was not a large flame, just a small tongue of blue and gold that licked across the scrap metal and left it glowing red. But Jinho understood immediately why she had been afraid to show him. "My people can all do this," Kira said, and her voice was shaking. "But the hegemony said if we ever used our fire, they would kill us. So we learned to forget we had it, and I have never shown anyone because..." She stopped because she was crying, and Jinho crossed the distance between them and knelt down so their eyes were level. "Fire is not evil," he said gently. "It is just fire. It can destroy, but it can also create. It can hurt, but it can also warm. And what matters is not what power you have, but how you choose to use it." Kira stared at him as if he had spoken words from another universe. And Jinho realized that no one had ever told her she was allowed to be what she truly was. "You are not a monster," he said. "You are not property. You are Kira, and you are extraordinary." She threw her arms around him and sobbed into his shoulder. And Jinho held her the way he used to hold Minji when she had nightmares. And he knew in that moment that he would protect this child with everything he had. He did not know that their quiet life was about to be shattered. That Administrator Vexthal had already begun watching his shop. That forces larger than one mechanic and one dragon were moving against them all. All he knew was that for the first time in 5 years, he had something worth fighting for. The next day, station security came knocking. Administrator Vexthal was a creature of angles and edges, belonging to a species called the Vrexi, who resembled giant praying mantises with chitinous armor the color of dried blood. And he took great pride in maintaining order on the lower decks of Nexus 7, which meant crushing anything that did not fit neatly into the categories defined by Galactic Compact Law. "Human Park Jinho," he said in a voice like scraping metal. "You have been harboring unlicensed property in a human business zone. This Dracaran unit has no work assignment and no registered owner, which means it is either stolen or abandoned. And either way, it must be confiscated." Jinho stood in the doorway of his shop with Kira behind him, and his heart was pounding, but his voice was steady. "She is not property," he said. "Incorrect," Vexthal replied with something like amusement. Galactic Compact Classification Code 774 clearly defines the Dracaran species as non-sentient labor resources. And your personal feelings about this classification are irrelevant. The unit will be taken to processing, and you will be fined 5,000 credits for unauthorized possession. And what happens at processing? Jinho asked, though he already knew. The unit will be evaluated for continued usefulness, Vexthal said. If it passes evaluation, it will be assigned to the mining operations on the Outer Rim. If it fails, it will be decommissioned. Kira made a sound behind him, a small whimper of pure terror, and Jinho felt something inside him snap. "She is my apprentice," he said. The words came out before he could think about them, before he could calculate the consequences, before he could remember that he was just one human mechanic with no power and no influence. But once the words were spoken, he did not take them. Vexth's compound eyes glittered with surprise. "That is impossible," the administrator said. "Dracaran cannot be apprentices. Apprenticeship requires legal personhood, and they have none under Galactic Compact law." "Perhaps," Jinho said, and now his mind was racing, grasping for something he had read years ago in a legal database. "But I am a citizen of Earth. An under-Earth law apprenticeship is defined as a protected relationship between teacher and student species is not mentioned anywhere in our legal codes. Earth law has no jurisdiction here." "Actually, it does," Jinho said, and he felt a grim satisfaction at the confusion spreading across Vexthal's angular face. Article 47 of the Compact Integration Treaty requires all member stations to honor the domestic legal protections of any registered citizen. I registered my business under Earth Commerce Law specifically because I do not trust compact bureaucracy. And that means my apprentice falls under Earth jurisdiction until the matter is formally adjudicated. Vexthal was silent for a long moment, and Jinho could almost see the calculations happening behind those compound eyes. The administrator was a creature of rules, and Jinho had just thrown a tangle of conflicting rules at his feet. "This is not over," Vexthal said finally. "I will file a formal challenge, and when the tribunal rules that Dracaran cannot hold apprenticeship status, I will personally oversee this unit's processing, and your fines will be tripled for wasting administrative resources." He turned and left with his security escort, and Jinho let out a breath he did not know he had been holding. "What did you do?" Kira asked in a small voice. "I bought us time," Jinho said, "but only a little. We need help. And I think I know where to find it." He sent a message that night to an old friend, a human rights lawyer named Yunseri who worked for an organization called the Terran Advocacy Council. And he had not spoken to her in 3 years because after Sunhee and Minji died, he had cut himself off from everyone who reminded him of his old life. Sari responded within the hour. "I have been waiting for a case like this," she said through the holographic communication link, her face determined and sharp. "The Dracaran classification has been legally questionable since the hegemony pushed it through 200 years ago. Nobody has ever challenged it because the Dracaran themselves cannot initiate legal proceedings and no other species wanted to get involved. Can we win?" Jinho asked. "I do not know," Sari admitted. "But there is a provision in human law called the right of witnessed sentience. If a human witness can testify that a being displays genuine self-awareness and moral reasoning, that being can petition for legal personhood." What does that mean for Kira? "It means she would have to prove her sentience in front of a tribunal," Sari said. "She would have to demonstrate that she thinks, feels, and makes moral choices, not just mimicry or learned behavior, but genuine consciousness." Jinho looked at Kira, who had been listening with wide golden eyes. "Can you do that?" he asked her gently. "I do not know," Kira whispered. "My people, we have spent so long pretending to be less than we are. We learned that showing intelligence meant being punished, that speaking our thoughts meant being beaten, that expressing emotion meant being separated from our families. She was trembling, and Jinho understood suddenly the depth of trauma that 300 years of oppression had carved into her people's very souls. "You do not have to do this," he said. "We can find another way. We can run, find a ship heading toward human space." "No," Kira said, and there was something new in her voice, something that sounded almost like fire. "I am tired of hiding. I am tired of pretending to be nothing. If I run now, I will be running forever. And so will every other Dracaran in the galaxy." She lifted her head and met his eyes. And Jinho saw the dragon she was meant to be. "I will prove what I am," she said. "And if they still want to call me an animal after that, then the fault is in their eyes and not in me." Jinho smiled despite the fear that gripped his heart. "Then we fight," he said. Together, the tribunal was scheduled for 30 days later, and Jinho knew that the hegemony of scales would do everything in their power to ensure that Kira failed. But he also knew something that they did not. Knew what? Humans were capable of when they decided to protect something. Precious, and Kira was precious beyond measure. The tribunal chamber was vast and cold, designed to make those standing before it feel small and insignificant. And it was filled with representatives from a dozen species who had come to witness what many were calling the most important legal case in a generation. Gina stood beside Kira at the petitioner's platform, and he could feel her trembling, even though she was trying hard not to show it. Behind them sat Yoon Seri with her legal documents and her fierce determination. And across the chamber sat the opposition. The hegemony of scales had sent their senior diplomatic representative, a massive serpentine creature called Lord Desser, whose scales were the color of polished obsidian and whose eyes held 300 years of contempt for the species his people had. Conquered Administrator Vextel was there too, his compound eyes gleaming with anticipation of victory. The tribunal was overseen by 3 judges from neutral species, a crystalline being from the Prism Collective, a floating gas form entity from the Nebula Consortium, and an ancient tree-like creature from the Grove of Whispers, and they watched with expressions that revealed nothing. "We are here to adjudicate petition 7742 Alpha," the crystal judge announced in a voice like singing glass. "The human citizen Park Jinho claims the right of witness sentence on behalf of the Dracaran designated as Kira's hegemony of scales. Contests this petition on the grounds that Dracaran are classified as non-sentient under Galactic Compact law. This is a waste of time," Lord Desser said, his voice dripping with disdain. "The Dracaran are animals, sophisticated animals. Perhaps, but animals nonetheless. They have no culture, no art, no philosophy, no capacity for moral reasoning. That is what we are here to determine," the tree judge said slowly. "The petitioner may present their case." Yoon Seri stood and began presenting evidence recordings of Kira solving complex mechanical problems, testimony from other humans who had witnessed Dracaran displaying behavior that suggested sentience, historical documents suggesting that the original classification had been politically motivated rather than scientifically justified. But Jinho could see that the judges were not moved. Evidence on screens and paper was one thing, but the hegemony had 300 years of propaganda on their side. Every species in the galaxy had grown up learning that Dracaran were clever animals, and unlearning something so deeply ingrained required more than documents. It required seeing. "We request that the subject be examined directly," Lord Desser said with a smile that showed rows of needle-sharp teeth. "Let us test this supposed sentience here and now." The judges agreed, and Kira was called to stand alone before the tribunal. She looked so small standing there, a young golden dragon facing down the weight of an entire galaxy's prejudice. and Jinho wanted desperately to go to her, but the rules forbade anyone from assisting during the examination. "Perform a calculation," Lord Desser commanded. "What is 847 multiplied by 293? 248,171. Kira answered immediately. "Trained response," Desser said, dismissively. "Many animals can be trained to perform mathematical tricks. Show us something an animal cannot do." He slithered closer to her, towering over her small form. "Tell us about your feelings," he said with mocking sweetness. "Are you sad that your parents are dead? Do you miss them?" Kira flinched, and Jinho saw her retreat into herself. Saw her becoming the silent, submissive creature that her people had been forced to become. "Answer the question." "Animal," Desser hissed. Kira's voice was barely a whisper. "I do not. You see?" Desser turned to the judges triumphantly. "They cannot even articulate basic emotional responses. This is mimicry, nothing more. A parrot repeating sounds it does not understand." Kira was shaking badly now, her eyes fixed on the ground, and Jinho could bear it no longer. "May I approach the subject?" he asked the judges. "This is highly irregular," Desser began. "Permitted," the gas-form judge said. "Human law allows for the witnessing party to provide support during examination." Jinho walked to Kira and knelt down so that their eyes were level, just as he had done in the shop when she first showed him her fire, and he did not tell her what to say or how to act because he knew that would only prove the hegemony right. "I see you, Kira," he said softly. "I have always seen you." Something shifted in Kira's golden eyes. The fear did not disappear, but something else rose up beneath it. Something that had been buried for 300 years in every Dracaran heart. She lifted her head. "My mother's name was Alarith," she said, and her voice was stronger now. "She used to sing to me when I was small songs from our people's history, songs that were forbidden. Songs about the time when we flew free under 3 suns and built cities of crystal and light." The chamber had gone completely silent. "My father's name was Korath, and he taught me to read the old writing in secret. He said that as long as one Dracaran remembered who we truly were, we could never truly be enslaved." Tears were streaming down her golden scales now, but her voice did not waver. "They killed my parents because they were too old to work anymore. They called it decommissioning, as if my mother and father were broken machines. But machines do not love their children. And my parents loved me with everything they had." She turned to face Lord Desser directly. And what happened next made Jinho's heart stop. "I could hate you for what your people have done to mine," Kira said. "I could hate you for taking my parents, for clipping our wings, for making us forget who we were, but I choose not to." Desser recoiled as if she had struck him. "I choose to forgive you," Kira continued. "Not because you deserve it, but because my parents would have wanted me to. They taught me that hatred is a poison that destroys the one who carries it. And I will not let your cruelty turn me into something cruel." She stood tall, and for a moment she was not a small, malnourished child, but something ancient and magnificent. "I am Kira of the Dracaran, I think. I feel, I love, I grieve, I hope, I dream, and you can call me an animal until the stars burn out. But that will not change what I know to be true." She looked at the judges with eyes that blazed like golden fire. "I am a person. I have always been a person, and I demand that you see me." The chamber remained silent for a long moment. Then the crystal judge spoke. "This tribunal rules in favor of the petitioner. The being known as Kira is hereby granted provisional personhood status under Galactic Compact law, pending full review by the High Council." Lord Desser exploded in fury. But Jinho did not hear his protests. He was too busy holding Kira as she collapsed into his arms, sobbing with relief. And he was crying too, because he knew that this was only the beginning. But it was a beginning that no one had believed was possible, and Beginnings had power, beginnings could change everything. The news spread across the galaxy like wildfire. In Drygrass, a Dracaran had been recognized as a person not through violence or revolution, but through the simple act of speaking her truth before a tribunal that had been forced to listen, and suddenly the galaxy was asking questions that had been buried. For 300 years, other humans began coming forward on space stations and colony worlds and trading posts throughout the galaxy. Humans who had quietly witnessed Dracaran intelligence and emotion for years finally had legal ground to stand on. The right of witness sentience was invoked 17 times in the first month after Kira's ruling, and each case brought more attention to the lie that had been accepted as truth for so long. The hegemony of scales raged and threatened, but they had made a critical miscalculation. They had believed that no species would ever challenge them over the fate of the Dracaran, because the Dracaran had nothing to offer except labor and no power to defend themselves. They had forgotten about humans. Earth's government issued a formal statement 2 months after the tribunal. The people of Earth do not recognize the enslavement of sentient beings under any classification system. President Chun announced to the Galactic Compact Assembly, any Dracaran who reaches human-controlled space will be granted immediate asylum and full legal personhood. We invite other species who believe in justice to join us in this position. 3 species announced their support within the week, then 5 more, then a dozen, and suddenly the hegemony found itself facing economic sanctions from a coalition that controlled crucial trade routes. The Underground Railroad began almost immediately. Hose repair shop became a waypoint. Ships carrying Dracaran refugees would stop for emergency repairs and leave with their cargo holds a little lighter. And no one asked questions because the mechanics of the lower decks had decided that some things mattered more than regulations. Kira worked alongside Jinho every day, learning everything he could teach her and more. She had a gift for understanding machines that went beyond anything Jinho had ever seen. As if the fire inside her could sense the flow of energy through wires and conduits and engines. She also began teaching other Dracaran young ones, mostly children who had been born into slavery and taught to believe they were nothing. Kira would gather them in the back of the shop after hours and teach them to read and write and calculate. And she would tell them stories of their people's history that she had learned from her father. We were great once, she would say, her golden eyes shining, and we will be great again, not because we will conquer or dominate, but because we will remember who we are. Jinho watched her become a leader, watched a frightened child transform into someone who inspired hope in others. And he thought of Sunhee and Minji and knew that they would have been proud years past the hegemony, eventually buckled under the economic pressure, and agreed to a gradual emancipation program. It would take decades to undo 3 centuries of enslavement, but the process had begun. And for the first time in 300 years, Dracaran children were born with the legal status of people. Rather than property, Kira became the first Dracaran licensed mechanic in galactic history. She passed her certification exam with the highest score ever recorded on Nexus 7. And when she received her license, there was a ceremony attended by representatives from a dozen species. Jinho stood in the front row with tears running down his face. And when Kira made her acceptance speech, she did not talk about her own achievements. She talked about a human mechanic who had given her a bowl of rice when she was starving, who had seen a person when everyone else saw an animal, who had taught her that fire was not something to fear but something to cherish. Everything I am, Kira said, looking directly at Jinho, I owe to him, not because he saved me, but because he believed I was worth saving. Jinho retired a few years later, his hands too old and stiff to work on delicate engine components anymore. But he did not leave the station because he could not imagine being anywhere else. Kira took over the shop. She expanded it, hired other Dracaran mechanics, built it into the most respected repair operation on Nexus 7, and she never forgot where she had come from one evening. As the station lights dimmed to simulate sunset, Kira was cleaning up after a long day when she heard a sound at the back door. She turned to find a young Dracaran standing there, barely more than a child, with scales the color of deep blue and eyes that held generations of fear and hunger. "Please," the child whispered. "I have nowhere else to go." Kira smiled, and for just a moment she was 12 years old again, standing in the doorway of a small repair shop and asking a stranger for scraps. She pulled up a chair and set a bowl of rice on the table. "Sit down and eat," she said gently. "You are safe here. No one will hurt you. And there is always more." The child sat and ate with the desperate hunger of someone who had never been certain of their next meal. And Kira watched with eyes that held both sorrow for all the years of suffering her people had endured and hope for all the years still to come. When the bowl was empty, the child looked up at her with wonder. "Why are you helping me?" The child asked. Kira thought of Jinho, of her parents, of everyone who had believed in her when belief seemed impossible, and she knew exactly what to say. "Because someone helped me once," she said, "and he taught me that kindness is not weakness. It is the strongest thing in the galaxy." She reached out and took the child's hand. "Now let me tell you a story," she said, "about a human mechanic who met a hungry dragon, and how they changed the universe one bowl of rice at a time. Outside the shop, the stars burned in the endless dark, and somewhere among them humans and Dracaran were building a new future together, not because anyone had forced them to, but because one man had looked at a forgotten child and seen something worth fighting for. That was the miracle, not magic, not technology, not the intervention of gods, just a simple act of recognition, repeated over and over across the galaxy until it became a revolution. Sometimes the most powerful thing in the universe is simply this: to see someone as they truly are, and to tell them that they matter. Jinho had done that for Kira, and Kira had done it for her people. And now that light was spreading to every corner of the galaxy, and it had all started with a bowl of rice and 4 simple words: "May I have leftovers?" The end.